So, a common drill task, perhaps sometimes when players are really losing connection with the ground, can be to remove the footwear and simply reconnect to the surface with the sole of the foot. Now, again, this can be in either the trail foot or the lead foot, and is a really nice task, something I've used before and can be very helpful. Maybe perhaps as opposed to when you see or observe poor footwork, saying to the player simply stop doing that or try to do this. Maybe the idea of taking the shoes off, that natural reconnection, can really help a player stabilize that foot movement. But when we look at that, what really changes in the player, or does anything change? Simply changing the foot, obviously, we're hoping to emit some change in the golf swing. There's a plan, there's a goal behind it. However, when you look at 3D and actually movement, what starts to change? So we have a player here, it's a 5 handicap golfer hitting driver. We've hit 25 drives with the shoes on, 25 with them off, and we've just basically chosen the graph that was closest to the average of both. So this isn't exactly precise. This isn't every shot. This is a graph of an average of what we saw when they had shoes on versus shoes off. So again, shoes on the left-hand side, shoes off on the right-hand side. And what we're looking at here is the graphs through the main segments. So through the pelvis, the thorax, the trail wrist, the kind of movement of the head, and the kinematic sequence. And as we move through these graphs, we're just seeing, is there big differences? Is there big variances that we can see and we can point to and say, you know what? We were hoping to get this, but actually when you took those shoes off, this is the reaction we got. Therefore, the cost is too high. I don't want you to end up doing this just to get what we originally wanted. So for every real change, for every pattern development, there is always a cost somewhere. It just really is, how much is that cost, and is the payback worth it overall in the time that you're working on these things. So as we kind of work down, just even kind of quickly observing the pelvis rotation. These values are impact, by the way, the pelvis rotation over here. So 18, just under 18 on the left, 21 on the right, very little change. And again, what must be said when we're looking at these values is, if you had some of the most elite players in the world on this system, when you look at 3D values, no matter what system they're on, if they hit 5 shots in a row, you are not going to get an exact repetition of the pelvis rotation, thorax rotation. You are not going to get 20, 20, 20, 20. There will always be some differential. No player moves the exact same way every single time they hit a golf shot. So as a kind of an average, the deviation would be -2, -3 from what I've seen from my experience. So when we look at these things, anything really above -2, -3, getting into that -4, 5, 6, 7, 8 differential, they're the things we're really interested in as we look through this. So as we kind of scan down these numbers, these graphs, just really seeing, do we see those differences? Do we see differences, let's say, above -3, -4, -5, getting into those larger numbers? And as we work our way down, we really don't. Okay. And again, the player on the left hand side, same player, sorry, left hand side shoes on, right hand side shoes off. We really don't see mass differentials as we work down here. There is some shape changes in the graph, which would be fun to explore at a later date. That's not really why we're doing this post. But as we work our way down, you could say there's a little bit of change in the lead wrist there. Perhaps we'll have a little look at that because of how it moves. But as we keep working down, very little differences in the numbers from right versus left. Now, as we work down to that pelvis, the PT rotation, which is the pelvis and the thorax, their interaction with each other, again, looking at that rotational value, maybe about 3 or 4 there. We look at that bend number, 46 versus 39, 7 there. So maybe starting to see something that might, again, be worth further investigating. Not saying right or wrong, just investigate a little bit more, and then work our way down. Head rotation, 2, thorax rotation in terms of that number, 2 versus 2. When we look at that pelvis rotation, we already looked at that up top. And again, maybe as we work our way a little bit further down here, now we kind of start to see that hand sway number, 1.44 on the left hand side, 9.38 on the right hand side. So that might be something to explore, definitely. A big change in terms of where the hands are positioned. Now, why might that be affected? Well, we talk about that reaction, that ground force reaction, and how that might affect how the hands travel. So we know ground reaction forces will affect wrist and hand travel. This could be where we're seeing it a little bit here. So if we did have that potential change of that hand sway, the towards and away, towards the target, away from the target from where it began, that might be something that might influence the golfer in a negative way that we perhaps wouldn't want. So just overall, looking at these things, the one thing that would really jump out to us if we were assessing this, observing this, would be the hand sway. But let's have a little look at the dynamics behind this player. So a quick look at some dynamics from the golfer. And again, left-hand side is shoes on, right-hand side is shoes off. What do we mean by dynamics? First of all, now generally when we're looking at 3D, we're looking at a value, a number of that is related to a segment. So is the chest moving up or down? Is it swaying from left to right? Or is it rotating to the value that we would like? Dynamics are more looking at the whole movement as a whole and how the player is really creating speed and how the segments are interacting and stretching through each other. It'll also look at the timing of the golf swing. So when are those segments firing throughout the golf swing and what's their rate of acceleration? So they're more the dynamic side of things as we look in 3D. So when we're looking at this player again, left-hand side shoes on, right-hand side shoes off, really the one number that would pop out to us pretty quickly is this pelvis rate of elevation. So on the left-hand side, 40 centimeters per second, the right-hand side, 46.4 centimeters per second. Now, what is pelvis rate of elevation? That is the speed at which the pelvis is elevating through impact. So if you think those players getting down towards impact, pushing off the ground, as you might hear that phrase, really elevating through impact, how quickly is that happening? And that can be a nice source of speed, right? Now, it also can be a hindrance perhaps with some players, but just simply looking and observing the differentials today, not really assessing whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, that we do get slightly higher rate of elevation through the pelvis over on the right-hand side from this player when they have the shoes off. So the bigger connection, the more connection to the ground, the player is actually using that to push a little bit faster with the pelvis through that impact area. If we work our way a little bit lower than that, so past that rate of elevation that we were just looking at and work our way down, we have another number here. And this is the hand path arc length. Now that basically refers to the width that the hands travel throughout the golf swing. Now we have an A to T, which is addressed to top of backswing, and a T to I, which is top of backswing to impact. If we look with the shoes on over here on the left-hand side, we have 184.5 in the backswing, 151 in the downswing. So a difference of about 32, 33. We look over here on the right-hand side, we have 191 in the backswing, 167 in the downswing. So again, the difference is the same. However, the arc length is a little bit wider when the shoes come off. Now, again, we're not saying why that's the case, but maybe perhaps the player pushing into the ground a little bit more on the way back, perhaps widening that hand path a little bit as they go back. So when we look at the arc length in terms of that, it isn't necessarily purely the width, it is the overall travel. But definitely on the right-hand side, we get that more length of travel when we're looking at that in the player on the right-hand side. So perhaps when we look at this swing, we might see it wider, potentially. We could also see the same width, but we could just see it travel a little bit longer. So just something, again, interesting. Potentially from that, we could potentially get a little bit more speed because of that longer travel in the down or in the backswing, excuse me, and in the downswing. So again, just something to observe potentially of this player and what the differences are. And then finally, as an overall assessment, just looking at these two swings comparatively with an overall viewpoint. So not looking at graphs, just looking at numbers. And what we've done here is we've put in a percentage differential of 40%. So the only values we're really seeing are values that have changed more than 40% between these two swings. So again, when we're looking at this, the gray swing is with the shoes on. The yellow numbers are representing the swing with the shoes off. So as we kind of look down this screen, the one that would really pop out to us is that green value. That's the biggest change. And that really is the lead wrist deviation. So that's the hinging up and down of that wrist at setup. So that's actually changing. So when we look at the shoes that this player is wearing, perhaps the shoes are a little bit taller off the ground. So as that player kind of gets taller, we might see that wrist start to kind of work a little bit more down towards the ground. When that kind of player can take the shoes off, sits a little bit lower into the ground, we might see that lead wrist be in a different position. In terms of looking at those other values, again, we look at impact. Is there anything really differences there? We could look definitely at that pelvis. When we look at the up and down motion, again, the gray being the shoes on, 0.6 centimeters down. The yellow being the shoes off, 2.1 centimeters up. So the pelvis, again, elevating, going back to that value that we saw before. That would be very much in keeping with that same value, that we have a higher rate of elevation and the pelvis is moving or is more up than true impact. So we could really look at any of these numbers in terms of getting these values, and then there's our dynamic numbers down the right hand side. But the idea when we really look back at all of this, the point of this really when we're looking at these values is, yes, the values will change. There's a cost for doing business no matter what we're looking for. So when you try and attempt these different tasks, drills to achieve your goal, whatever the case may be, it's always good to know what might potentially change. So you can keep an eye out for it. So for example, if we look through all of these numbers, the next time we know, okay, hey, I won't want this player to try the same thing again. What do I know to look out for? Or even potentially in the future, when I see something change in here, when simply taking off the shoes changes the player in a certain way, I'll note that down. And if I want to instigate or invite that change at a later date, I simply now have a drill where I know those two marry together. So again, nothing massively revealing, nothing seismic in terms of golf coaching with this video, But just the idea of looking at possible changes when we create these different environments, invite different changes in the player, in their concepts, in their beliefs, or in this case, in what they were wearing, what actually really changes. And then knowing what changes, then we can actually really assess, is this good for the player? Is it negative for the player? And then keep that information for future reference.